Masechet Yevamot, Daf Lamed. We have on the first Amud 4 Mishnayot, which are all related, similar cases, all variations on a theme, but each with a subtle difference that we'll have to analyze. So we begin. We have 3 brothers, 2 of them are married to 2 sisters, and the other brother is married to a unrelated woman. One of the brothers who was married to one of the sisters dies, and then the brother who's married to an unrelated woman does yibum and takes her as a wife, vamet, and he himself dies. So the 2 women fall to one of the remaining brother who was married to one of the sisters. One of them leaves without anything because she is related to his wife, his wife's sister, and the remaining wife is her co-wife. So case number 1 in pictures, 3 brothers. These 2, Reuven and Shimon, are married to 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. Levi is married to an unrelated woman, and Shimon dies. So leaving Leah. Of course, Reuben cannot do Yibum with Leah, but Levi can, and he does perform Yibum. Okay, very good. If Levi should die, then this is a simple case, right? Open shut. Reuben is related to Leah; it's his wife's sister, so therefore that is prohibited. And according to the Mishnah, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, not only is she prohibited to him, but also Sila, because it's Arva. There is no Yibum, no Chalisa. Both of the women go free. Okay, so this is no chidush here, but we're bringing this whole case for the next line. What if, instead of doing yibum here, Levi does only ma'amad with Leah? So we already saw yesterday, what is the status of ma'amad? According to Bet Shammai, it may be full marriage, or at least nisuin. It's on a biblical level. But now we're following Bet Hillel. According to Bet Hillel, ma'amad is a very low level. It's only midrabanan. And so therefore we have to analyze this on a deoraita and a derabanan level. So on a deoraita level, Levi did me'amad with Leah. Ma'amad is nothing. So therefore Leah is still a Yevamah. Still awaiting, not related to Levi yet. And so now Levi dies, so Leah can go free because that is his ervat to her. But Sila is not related at all, so he could perform Yibum and would need to perform Chalitza with Sila on the biblical level. On the Drabanan level, however, it could be that this is a marriage, and so therefore, since they are in fact related, Levi and Leah, when Levi dies, so Leah falls to Reuven as a Yevamah, but she is an Erva. If she's an Erva, so the co-wife also goes free. Therefore, Reuven, because of the biblical rabbinic level, cannot perform Yibum on Sila, but she does need something, and that's why he has to do Chalitza. Okay, so that is case number 1. Now the Gemara asks, Ta'amad avad ba'ma'amad, halo avad ba'ma'amad, nochrit yebume name meyabema. Oh, so we see from this that it's only in the case that Levi does ma'amad, then he has to do chalitza, because on a biblical level he needs something. But let's see, he didn't do yibum, he didn't do ma'amad, Levi did not do ma'amad with Leah, and so now here we have Shimon died, Levi, someone needed to do yibum, but in the meantime, Levi did nothing and he died. So at this point, Leah, there was no one that can do Yibum with her because the only surviving brother is Reuven, and that is Erva. So she goes free. That does not affect Sila because they are not related at all. There's no co-wife relationship, and therefore Reuven would be able to perform Yibum on Sila. Okay, good. But what can we infer from this? Amar Rav Nachman, Zot omeret en zika afilu behad acha. We can learn from this that there is no zika, that the responsibility that Levi has to take Leah, that zika is not considered like marriage. if it was considered like marriage, then even if he did not do ma'amad, it would be as if he is married to her, and then when he dies, they would be like co-wives. So we see from the fact that that's not true, and that if he does not do ma'amad, the zikah is meaningless, and Sila and Leah remain unrelated, not co-wives, and because Ruva can do yibum with Sila when there's no ma'amad at all. We see from there that this Mishnah assumes en zika. All right, so we got the first case down. Now, case number 2 is going to be similar to the first case, with just one difference in the order that the brothers die. Shelosha achin, shenai mehem nesuin, shete achayot v'achat nasui nochrit. Same setup, 3 brothers, 2 of them are married to 2 sisters, and 1 is not related. Met hanasui nochrit v'kanas echad mibale achayot et ishto v'met. But this time, the brother who is married to an unrelated woman dies first, and then one of the remaining brothers does yibum, and he himself dies. Harishona yoset mishum achot isha, ushneya mishum sarata. So let's see the case and the law here. So 3 brothers, and now Levi dies first, leaving Sila. Sila is not related to anybody, and so you can do yibum. Shimon does yibum with Sila, and now he has 2 wives, Sila, unrelated, and Leah, who is a sister. Shimon then dies. Okay, so Reuven falls to him, Leah and Sila. Leah is his wife's sister, so she's Arva, so she goes free, and since she is Arva, Sarata also goes free, and so both of them go free. Good. Now, that's an obvious case. There's really no need to say that. It's only brought as a setup for the ma'amad case. Asa ba ma'amad v'amet, nochrit choleset, velo mitya bemet. If Shimon does not do yibum, but rather only ma'amad tesila, so in that case, on a biblical level, well, when Shimon dies, he kenaiz erva tele'ah. So she would go free. But on a biblical level, they are not co-wives. So he could have done yibum and would have a need to do something, or chalitza to Sila. However, on a rabbinic level, we have that this is considered a marriage. So they are co-wives, and therefore Reuben cannot perform yibum, and so he has to do halisa, and so that is the law in this case. Okay, so very similar. It's so similar that the Gemara asks, Hatula mali, why do I even need this? Hainu hach, isn't it the same as the first case? I mean, I know there's a difference in order, but it's the same principle. Hashtau mahatam de'achot isha, havya sara lenochrit amart, nochrit asura, Hacha de nochrit havya sara la'achot isha lo kol sheken. The case in the first Mishnah is in fact even more obvious than the case in the second Mishnah. Here's why. In the first case, where Levi dies second, so Reuven's primary obligation to perform yibum is on Sila, who would be permitted, and the problem only comes from this possible secondary co-wife, Leah, who is his sister-in-law. She brings it in. So if here, where the primary obligation falls on Sila and she is permitted, and yet because of the secondary co-wife, she brings it in and makes Sila prohibited, then all the more so in the second case, where the primary obligation to perform yibum is on Leah, because Shimon dies second, and so he would have to do yibum with Leah, and the secondary obligation is Sila. So here, all the more so, since the primary obligation is prohibited, that's Adva, so then for sure in this case, the secondary obligation, Sila, who may come in as a co-wife, also he would not be able to perform yibum with. And so therefore, really, I only need the first case, which is the bigger chidush, and the second case is obvious. This is totally redundant. And so the Gemara admits, you're right, the second case is more redundant and not needed. But here's a really interesting explanation of why we have both. Tana hach Tana beresha. The Tana, meaning the author of the Mishnah, the reciter who memorized and taught the Mishnayot, actually only had this second Mishnah first. In other words, originally, the first Mishnah of this daf did not exist. He did not recite that case. In fact, the first Mishnah of the case, he actually said is permitted, because after all, his primary obligation for Yibum is with Sila, and he's not related to Sila. And so Le'ah we can keep out of the picture. So the original Tana originally actually permitted this case, and therefore did not teach this Mishnah. But Vehadad Chazyali Surah, then after rethinking it, said, you know what, this case also should be prohibited. But because something that's a chidush is more beloved, right? So, you really worked hard on this and figured out, you know what, I have to add this law. And so therefore, since it's more beloved as a chidush, the Tanakh put it first. And the Mishnayot do remain in their order. Once they're in this order, then they remain. So even though the order now is a case that is less obvious, and then all the more so the second case, it's a lozu afzo, right? And certainly the second case. And so really, logically, if he knew that both were prohibited, he may have taught them the other way around. And nevertheless, because chronologically, the first Mishnah was taught later, it's appended onto the beginning to show its prominence as a beloved chidush. All right, so now we got two cases, and we move on to the third. Shelosha achin, shenai mehen nisuin, shete achayot vechad nasui nochrit. So far, all the same. 3 brothers, 2 are married to 2 sisters, and 1 is married to someone who is not related. Umet echad מבעלי אחיות וכנס נשוי נוכרית את אשתו ומתה אשתו של שני ואחר כך מת נשוי נוכרית הרי זו אסורה עליו עולמית הואיל ונאסרה עליו שעה אחת. And so one of the brothers who's married to one of the sisters dies. So 3 brothers, and Shimon dies. Like in the first case, Levi does Yibum with Leah. But here's the twist. In the meantime, Rachel dies. And so now they are no longer sisters. Afterwards, Levi dies. So when Levi dies, you have Leah and Sila fall to Reuven. Reuven now is permitted to Leah, because the sisters, if you're married to one sister and she dies, then the other sister is permitted. And so therefore, the law in this case is nevertheless prohibited. Asura alav olamit ho'il v'nesra alav sha'achat. And the reason is because when Shimon died and Leah became available as a Yevamah, she was at that point prohibited to Reuven because Rachel was still alive. And here's the law: once prohibited, always prohibited. Once a woman is presented as Yevamah and one cannot do Yibum, so then that is considered Eshet Ach forever. And so even after Rachel dies and she is presented again as a Yevamah, she is nevertheless remains prohibited, and she goes free as well as the co-wife. Okay, interesting case. Now, here's the derivation of that principle. Amarav Yuda Amarav Kol Yevama She'en Ani Kore Ba Bishat Nefila Yevama Yavo Aleha. Anytime you have Yevama, who at the time when she falls to be a Yevama, when her husband dies, if at that point you cannot perform Yibum and you cannot apply Yevama Yavo Aleha, then she remains as Eshet Ach, as if he had children. Va'asura, and therefore is prohibited forever. My kamash. Okay, so that's Rav's statement. Now we ask, my kamash malan, Rav, why do we have to tell us that? Right? Isn't that clear from the Mishnah? Tanena hadezo asura olav olamit ho'il v'nesra alav sha'achat. Right? It says exactly that. Okay, it's true. Rav brings a pasuk, but his law has no chidush. So why are you telling us this? Oh, here's the reason. Mahu detema hanemilehecha de la achazyala ben fila rishona. אבל היכא דאי חזיאלה בנפילה ראשונה, אמה תשתרא כמשמע. The reason is because I might have thought that there's a difference in the order between Rachel and Levi dying. we presented the order as first Levi does Yibum, and then Rachel dies, which means that at the first Nefilah, meaning when Shimon died, that entire time when she was a single waiting a Shomeret Yavam, she was prohibited to Reuven. So therefore, she's prohibited forever. But I might have thought that if Shimon dies and then Rachel dies, before Levi does Yibum. So that would mean that right in the middle, while she's waiting for Yibum, she becomes permitted to Reuven. So perhaps since in the first Nefilah, she was for half the time permitted, then maybe when she falls to Reuven again after Levi dies, we might have thought it's permitted. And therefore, Rav comes to teach that we don't go by the first Nefilah, but by the first moment of the first Nefilah. That since when Shimon died, she was prohibited to Reuven, therefore, even though she becomes permitted during the same Nefilah, she is nevertheless prohibited the whole time, and so that's an extra chidush that Rav adds. Okay, good. And we have a Mishnah in a couple of dapim that will teach this very fact. And so this is a problem because, you know what, this is still redundant. Rav doesn't need to say it. We can learn it from the following Mishnah, a simple case of only two brothers. Met echad mehem, v'achar kach meta ishto shel sheni. Two brothers married to two sisters. One of them dies, and then the sister, then his wife, then the wife of the Yavam dies. And so now in the middle, while she's waiting, she actually becomes permitted because she is no longer his wife's sister. Nevertheless, that Mishnah teaches she is prohibited forever. Because she was prohibited at the moment of Nefilah, therefore she is prohibited forever. So you see, we can learn the principle from there that it doesn't matter if her status changes in between when the sister dies. So again, why do we need the Rav to teach us this law that we already see from the Mishnah? And the answer is, מהודתמה התם דאידחה לה מהי ביתה לגמרי, אבל הכא דלה יידחה לה מהי ביתה לגמרי, אמה מיגו דחזיה להי נשוי נוכרית, Chazyana melahai kamashma lan. Oh, there is a difference because over there were only two brothers altogether. So if there's only two brothers altogether, then when she dies, when Shimon dies, imagine there's no Levi. When Shimon dies, Leah is related to Reuven and therefore is sent away. Right? These is erva. And therefore the zikah is broken, that's it, and becomes prohibited forever. And it doesn't matter if afterwards Rachel dies. But in this case with three brothers, since she is still a Yevamot, she doesn't go free because she still has a zikah to Levi. So therefore she's still kind of glowing. She's still a Shomeret Yavam. And for that reason, I might have thought, even from that next Mishnah on Daf Lamed Bet, I might have thought that in a case where there are three brothers, because she's still awaiting Yibum, if Levi dies, Levi dies after Rachel dies, so look, now she can in fact do Yibum with Reuven, because at that point she is permitted. And that's why Rav was saying, even in this case, we follow the initial status. When Shimon dies, she is prohibited, and therefore prohibited forever. And now we get to the last of the fourth of the four Mishnayot on this Amud that says Shelosha Achim Shenayim Mehem Nisuim Shete Achayot Ve'echad Nasui Nochrit. Same setup as before, but here Geresh Echad Miba'ale Achayot Et Ishto Umet Nasui Nochrit Uchnasa Hamgaresh Vamet זו היא שאמרו וכולן שמתו או נתקרשו שרותיהן מותרות. So we have the same setup as before. Three brothers, two are married to two sisters. In this case, first Shimon divorces his wife Leah. So he was married, but he divorces. Now, next, Levi dies, so Sila, Shimon does Yibum with Sila. This is permitted because Leah was his wife beforehand, before Levi died, but now is not related to her, so he can do Yibum with Sila. Afterwards, it doesn't matter if Shimon dies, then will still be if Shimon dies, then again it's okay because Leah is out of the picture, and so Reuven can do Yibum with Sila. Because Sila is not related to anyone, and Leah was divorced before anything happened. And so this case is permitted, and this is what we say as a rule. As long as they died, or as long as the Adva, in this case the sister, died or was divorced before before someone fell to Yibum, their co-wives are permitted. And so in this case, even though Sila and Leah were both married to Shimon, they are not technically co-wives because they were not married at the same time. Right, so that is the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to comment. Tama de geresh v'achar kach met, aval met v'achar kach geresh asura. The only reason why in this case Reuven can perform Yibum with Sila is because Shimon had already divorced Leah before Levi died. So Leah was not related at all, and so there's no issue of co-wife. However, we can infer from this that if the order was different and Levi died first, and Shimon didn't do Yibum yet, right? Levi died, and then he divorced his wife, and after that he did Yibum with Sila, then that would be a problem because they are alive here at the same time. They're related. Shimon was married to Leah at the time that he has a zikah to Sila, and so therefore we going to infer from here that yesh zikah according to this Mishnah, right? Since the permission for Reuven to take Sila is only when he first divorces Leah, and only then Levi dies, so Leah has to be totally out of the picture even beforehand. So we can infer that if she is still in the picture when the zikah is created, then it would be a problem, because that even this zikah would make Sila the co-wife of Leah, who is related to Reuven, and so should Shimon die, then it will still be the Sarat Adva. So Rav Ashi is going to derive from here. Rav Ashi zot omeret yesh zika afilu betre achin, even in a case where there are even two brothers who could perform Yibum. Nevertheless, because really Reuven could also do Yibum in this case, right? First, when Levi dies, it could have done Yibum. So therefore, even though there are two brothers, nevertheless, Shimon has a zikah. That zikah is considered significant, like they're married, and so therefore it's like they are co-wives. And once someone is a co-wife, they are prohibited forever. So when Shimon dies, then even though Leah was divorced afterwards, since at one point Leah was the co-wife of an Edva, then she would be prohibited forever. And so that would only be true if yesh zika, according to that inference that only this one case is permitted and the other way around is prohibited. And so now we have a challenge. Rav Ashi kashya de Rav Nachman. Back in the first case on this Amud, Rav Nachman derived that en zika. And now Rav Ashi derived that yesh zika, and both had good logical arguments. So how are we going to reconcile the first Mishnah Amud that said en zika, that implied en zika, and this one that implies yesh zika? So we'll answer it according to both opinions. Amar lach Rav Ashi, hu hadin da'afal gav de la avad ba ma'amar nochrit michalas chalsa yibume la miyabema. והתקתני מאמר לפוקה בית שמאי דאמרי מאמר קונה קניין גמור כמשמלן דלה כבית שמאי. So here's what he will do, is I'm going to explain to you that opening case that we started with, where we said only if there's ma'amad. Again, Shimon dies first, and then Levi takes Leah in Ma'amar. And so we said, if there's Ma'amar, then it's Levi is quasi-married, at least at the Rabbanan level, according to Bet Hillel, to Leah. And so when he dies, because there is a co-wife relationship mid Rabbanan, so therefore Reuven cannot take Leah and does not take Sila and Yibum either, and you have to do Chalisa. Rav Nachman inferred from this that, but if they did nothing at all, then Reuven would be permitted to take Sila, because Leah never became a co-wife. Rav Nachman said, see, en zika, because if there were zika, then it would be prohibited. So Rav Ashi says, I disagree with that logic. I think that that even if you did not do ma'amar, nevertheless, yesh zika, and so therefore Levi has a zika and is like married to Leah, and they are co-wives, and the same rule would be Reuven would still be prohibited to Sila. So why did the Mishnah only teach in the case of Ma'amad? It could have taught a bigger chidush, even when there's no Ma'amad. And Rav Ashi explains, because it wanted to teach us that we do not follow Bet Shammai. According to Bet Shammai, who says Ma'amad is like a full marriage, so then Levi would be married to Leah and Sila. They would be full co-wives, and therefore, once Levi died, so then Reuven would be fully advat to Leah, and the co-wife Sila would be able to go free even without chalitza. You would not even require chalitza. And so therefore, this Mishnah chose the case of Ma'amar to show that we do not agree with Bet Shammai, and that's why you need chalitza in this case. But in fact, you would also need chalitza in the case where no one did ma'amad. And so therefore Rav Ashi can explain both Mishnayot as meaning and zika. All right, so now let's try to reconcile according to the other opinion. Rav Nachman, kashya de Rav Ashi. V'chi temahu hadin da'afilu met v'achar kach geresh sarata muteret ela zohi lema'ute mai lema'ute kanas v'achar kach geresh. Rav Nachman can maintain his position that en zika, and he nevertheless explained this Mishnah by rejecting Rav Ashi's inference. And he will say, Rav Nachman will say, it makes no difference when the divorce happened. Not only if Shimon divorced Leah first thing, and only then Levi died and Sila became available. Of course, in that case, there is no connection, there is no co-wife connection between Leah and Sila. But I would say, Rav Nachman would say, even if Levi dies first and Sila becomes available, so there is a zika, and then Leah is divorced, and then Shimon does yibum with Sila, that also would be fine, because en zika. And so when Sila is waiting around, there's still no relation between Leah and Sila, as long as Leah is divorced first. And then he takes Yibum, and then he does Yibum, then Sila is okay and not related to Leah, so then when Shimon dies, Reuven can take Sila. And so I have no problem, I can explain the case just like that. But there's one more problem that we have to overcome. The last line of the Mishnah that says, this is an example. Zohi is an exclusive word and must be limiting and excluding something. And so, right, here's the line, Zohi she'amru, that if it was a death or divorce, then the co-wife is permitted. It has to mean that these cases are okay, but there has to be some other case that would not be okay. And so what other case, since according to Rav Nachman, it doesn't matter the order of divorce or yibum or divorce, so what case would be excluded? So we're going to try to answer. Hanicha isavadla kerebiyirmiya damar tavra mi sheshana zo lo shana zo v'haitana savar mitam mapelet v'haitana savar nisuin arishonim mapilim. So we can still find yet another case if we follow Yirmiya, who said this applied back in the first Perek, where there were two Mishnayot that seemed to have two different opinions, and he said the Mishnah is disjointed, and there are in fact two opinions among the Tanaim, and one Tana says that we judge a case by the time when death happens, whereas the other Tana said we judge a case from the time of when Nisu'in happens, as follows. In other words, there are in fact 3 different permutations to this case. The first 2 we saw already, which is if the divorce happens first and then Levi dies, then for sure Reuven can take Sila. There was no question about that. The case that Rav Nachman wants to come and include, right? That was Rav Asher said only that case is permitted, no other cases is allowed, and so therefore this case is allowed. And number 2 is what is excluded by the Zohi. That was Rav Asher. Rav Nachman, however, says no. I include this case also when Levi dies first. And so then there is a possibility of zikah, and then Leah is divorced. So you might think yes, but Rav Nachman says no. I think no zikah. So even this case is permitted. So what case would Zohi exclude? Well, there is another possible case. That is where Levi dies first, and then Shimon does Yibum, and then he divorces Leah. So if Levi dies first, let's look at the chart here. Levi dies first while Shimon is married to Leah, and only then Shimon does Yibum. Okay, so at this point, Shimon is actually married to Leah and Sila together. And only then he divorces Leah. So now he divorced Leah, so he's only married to Sila. And then Shimon dies. So if we follow the opinion that we only care about the time of death, then at the time of Shimon's death, he is only married to Sila, and therefore Reuven can perform Yibum. And so there is an opinion that says that, and another opinion that says we follow the time of marriage. And if at the time of Yibum, a marriage to Sila, Leah is still married to him, then Leah is forever prohibited to Reuven. So this was a machloket, and actually a machloket about a machloket, where we had in the first chapter, Rava says that this case is permitted to all Tanaim, even the third case. Whereas Rabbi Meir said it's a machloket between the 2 Mishnayot, it's a machloket Tanaim. So if we follow Rabbi Meir, who says that there is a machloket, then we can explain everything. Rav Nachman would permit these first 2 cases, and when the Mishnah, according to Rav Nachman, permits these 2 cases, and the Mishnah that says Zohi would exclude this third case and follow the opinion that said the third case is not allowed. So that's okay. We have a good answer according to the B'Miyah. The problem is, according to Rava, everyone says that even this case is permitted, and so there is no case that is excluded. So that's what we just said, right? So this would work according to Rav Nachman, and then we could say Zohi lemeute kanasul basof geresh. The Zohi clause is coming to exclude the case where first he got married and only then divorced the divorced Leah. First he did Yibum and then he got divorced. If we follow Rava, who back in the first Perek said that the Mishnayot are all according to one opinion, and it's following this, and of course the next case structure. We can go back there to see what the context there. Katane Zohi leme'utemai. According to that, there is no case that is prohibited, that you would have to say Zohi to limit it. Al korchech kerebi Yirmiyah sivir aleh. And so therefore we conclude that, you know what, Rav Nachman would have to follow Rabbi Yirmiyah's interpretation of those Mishnayot. And so, fine, we have an answer according to Rav Nachman. Good. Now, Ul Rava. So now let's focus our attention on Rava himself. Rava, who said that there is no Tana that prohibits that third case. So Rava can be consistent with Rav Asher. Rav Asher lives after Rava, but the point is that their opinions would be consistent. And in that case, because we follow Rav Asher, who says yesh zika, so the Zohi will be limiting met belo geresh, the case where Shimon dies without ever having divorced his wife. And so when he dies, he is still married to her, and therefore they are arayot. And in that case, since yesh zika, according to Rav Ashi, even if Shimon did not perform yibum yet, still they would be considered co-wives and prohibited to Rachel. So everyone would agree, Rava also would agree that case is prohibited, and that's what the Zohi is coming to exclude. If Rava would follow the opinion of Rav Nachman that en zika Zohi lema'otemai, then the word Zohi would not exclude any case. And so therefore we can reconcile everyone according to at least an opinion. Rava will be consistent with Rav Ashi, and Rav Nachman will be consistent with Rabbi Yirmiyah. And now we are ready for the next Mishnah. V'cholan shehayu bahen kiddushin or gerushin besafek. This Mishnah is referring back to the opening Mishnah of Perek Aleph that listed 15 relatives in which, if the Yavam is related to one of the Yevamot as Isur Adva, then she goes free, and the Sarah also goes free. However, what if there was a safek regarding the Kiddushin or Gerushin, such that there's a safek? We're not sure if the deceased was actually married to that Adva. So then we cannot allow her or the Sarah to go free. So they have to do Chalitza, and they cannot do Yibum. Chalitza in case there was Chalitza to the Sarah in case there was no relation, and not Yibum in case they were married. Kesad. Let's see examples. Safek Kiddushin. How can there be a doubt regarding Kiddushin? For example, Zarakla Kiddushin. Safek Karoblo, Safek Karobla. Zehu Safek Kiddushin. Instead of handing over the money or a shtar from the man to the woman and putting it in her hand, if a person throws it within her 4 amot, that is sufficient for putting it into her domain. But what if they're standing 8 amot away from each other, and he throws it and it lands somewhere on the borderline, and we're not sure if it's within her 4 amot or not? So then we're not sure. It could be that they are have kiddushin, could be that they are not married at all. And so let's see how such a case would work. So look at this chart. Forget the blue people here and forget this guy here. Just focus on these 4. We have Shimon is married to Hannah. Reuven has a daughter, Rachel. And one day Shimon comes and takes some money and throws it towards Rachel, and we're not sure, is this a kiddushin or not? If it is a kiddushin, then when Shimon dies, so this is Sarat Habat, and Rachel and Hannah can go free without chalitza. If, however, the money did not land near Rachel and there's no kiddushin, in that case, there is no relationship here, and simply Shimon dies, and Hannah is a Yevamah, a regular Yevamah, and Reuven can perform Yibum. So now, in this case, where we are in doubt, so since there may be a zikah between Reuven and Hannah, he has to do chalitza. But just in case so you have to do chalitza just in case, right? He can't do yibum because maybe this was a kiddushin. He cannot let it go free because maybe it was not a good kiddushin and there is a zikah. And so that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. So too, on the other way around, if they were for sure married, right? They did good kiddushin, and then Shimon sends a divorce, but a defective divorce. For example, Safek Kiddushin, Katab Bichtav Yado ve'en alav edim. The husband wrote it himself, but he didn't put witnesses on it. Yesh alav edim ve'en bo zeman, or there are witnesses, but he didn't put a date. Yesh lo zeman ve'en bo ela ed echad, or he put a date, but there's only one witness. All these zehu Safek Gerushin. In all these cases, actually, the get is a good get deoraita, but because there are problems with it, so they are problematic midrabanan, and therefore if she tries to get remarried, the rabbis would require her to get another get. So these are not full sefek, but they are problematic gitin. And so, therefore, in all these cases would be the same thing. Originally, Shimon is married to Rachel and Hannah. That's great. But maybe he got divorced. If they're divorced, then when Shimon dies, Reuven can take Hana, and so be required in Yibum or Halisa. If their divorce did not work, however, then they are related co-wives, and then Hana can go free. So we have to be machmir. She cannot go free, cannot do Yibum. Instead, you have to do Halisa in this case as well. Okay, straightforward enough. Now the Gemara asks, "Ve'ilu b'gerushin safek karov lo, safek karov la lakatane." This is a question. How come in the case of kiddushin, we talked about a case where he threw it, and we're not sure if it's close enough to her or not? How come we didn't say the same law regarding a get? A get also, the man has to give it to his wife, and if he can throw it too, but there also we should have the same law. If he throws it and we're not sure where it lands, then that would also be a safek. How come we don't mention that case? So, my ta'ama, amar Rabba, isha zo bechezkat heter lashuk omedet, umisafek ata ba leosra, al ta'asrena misafek. Okay, so first we have to distinguish between this case and the sefekot that are here. These sefekot actually are good gitin midoraita. So that's why the safek is only a problem midrabanan. So that's why these cases would, for sure, you have to do chalitza. But if the get didn't reach her at all, then that is a full-fledged doubt. She might be totally married, she might be totally not married. And so Rabbah explains, this woman, in the case of safek get, bechezkat heter, assuming before Shimon did this problematic throw with the get, if you had such a case. So the status quo beforehand is that he's married to Rachel and Hannah. So when he dies, Hannah can go, Rachel also, but particularly Hannah can go and marry anyone. So that's the best thing for her. She would most like to be able to marry anyone else and not be stuck to Reuven. And so that was the status quo before. That was the hazakah. Now you're going to bring a safek. Maybe this get is okay, and you're going to make her prohibited. No, we should remain with the status quo, and an uncertainty cannot uproot the status quo, and that is why we did not have such a case. We do not include such a case of a get if it's really a total safek get. It could be no get at all, or it could be a full get. In that case, we remain in the status quo, assume that she is married, and she can go ahead and marry anybody else. Abaye then challenges his teacher Rabba and asks, Amar le Abaye, I hachi b'kiddushin nameh, nema isha zo bechazkat heter le'yabam omedet, u'misafek ata ba le'osra, al tasrena misafek. If so, regarding the case of Kiddushin also, we should say that this woman, before anything happened, the status quo is that she was permitted to the Yavam. In other words, but before he tried to do Kiddushin, so he was married only to Hanan, so if he died, Hannah would be permitted to Reuven. So, she has an option of someone that will take care of her. And so, therefore, we should stick with the status quo and ignore the safek, the possibility of Kiddushin that will make her into a chalusa, right? So, because of a safek, we're going to prohibit her from doing yibum? No, don't do that. Don't make any safek. And so we answer, Hatam lechomra. Over here, you're right. Really, we should follow the hazakah and permit it to do yibum, but we want to be stringent, just in case this is a possibility that the kiddushin was in fact there, and so we are going to require halisa. Okay, why do we have a chumrah here and not? We don't say we should have a chumrah for a get. Is a good question, and which we're going to discuss on the next daf. And also the other question is, this is a chumrah in one sense, but it can lead to a kula in another sense. So this further discussion we will leave to the next daf. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.